Hey yo, what up, it's your boy. Okay. Let's not beat around the bush any longer. We all know why we are here. The Cowboy Bebop live action. As you can see with how red my eye is, I've been doing a lot of watching this past couple of days, and 10 episodes worth have been sunken into this Netflix live action Cowboy Bebop. Now, before we jump into the review, I gotta come out clean and being honest with some of you guys, otherwise you will mention it in the comments. But for those of you who don't know, I am one of many creators that have actually been sponsored by Netflix in the past over on their Netflix YouTube channel to do all sorts of reactions to Netflix shows. And recently, or the most recent one as I've been recording this video, there was a video that went up that also had me in it of us reacting to a couple of clips from the Netflix Cowboy Bebop series. And the reactions to that were honestly expected. Basically, we were given 2 clips out of context from the first episode, and we reacted to this way before the actual show came out. I'd like to think that my praises that I gave to those 2 clips in that Netflix video still stand, in that the cinematography and the music are pretty awesome, if you ask me. The music was a given, considering that they brought back the legendary composer Yoko Kanno, who also did the composition to the original. I give Netflix kudos to the fact that they brought back Yoko Kanno, because even Netflix understands just how important the soundtrack and the vibe of the music that is present in Cowboy Bebop was to the original anime series. Long and the short of it, if you've never seen the original Cowboy Bebop, the soundtrack is very jazz-inspired, noir-inspired, which is a nice juxtaposition with the sci-fi spaghetti western setting that the series finds itself in. And, you know, that is very much a trademark of Watanabe Shinichiro's creations. You know, same thing happened with Samurai Champloo with the juxtaposition of feudal Japan combined with the hip-hop soundtrack. Cowboy Bebop and jazz are 2 synonymous terms that need to go together. It's like PB and J of the anime world. And the cinematography, although depending on quality of level in different episodes, in general, were done pretty tastefully, in my opinion. If there's one thing that the Netflix Cowboy Bebop did pretty goddamn well, and to a, again, tasteful way, is the fact that they at least, they got their aesthetics down and pat, which I feel is a big problem that a lot of Japanese productions tend to find themselves when it comes to live action stuff. Like, the characters are dressed up really nicely, as you can see on the side of me right here. I mean, Spike, Jet, and Faye have their distinctive looks, and yes, there may be some subtle discrepancies between the live action actors' costumes and how they actually looked in the anime. I think for the most part, they made the actors look and feel like their characters, at least from the costume department. And the CG of the backgrounds, of the planets, of the environments, of the towns that they are in were done really tastefully and really nicely, accompanied by the pretty awesome and quite invigorating and exciting cinematography in a lot of the scenes. Especially a lot of the fight scenes. I mean, not only is the fighting choreography awesome, but it's also action-packed with the way that it's edited. And, you know, the more subtler, quieter scenes as well, I think were done in a very tasteful way, which I think even any Cowboy Bebop fan from the anime era can tell you did, I think, the vibe of the original Cowboy Bebop series justice. In saying all of that, I feel like this is where the praises start to dwindle down in this review. Because I'm not going to come out here and sugarcoat this just because I've been sponsored by Netflix a couple of times in the past. In saying that, the Cowboy Bebop live action, I think, was a valiant attempt, yet not exactly an attempt that ended up well. Because to me, the original Cowboy Bebop anime is a lot like a jazz band, where each of the members of the bebop are completely different in their characteristics, in their styles, in the way that they interact, and the story revolving around these eclectic characters may seem all over the place at first. But like any good jazz band, they take these random sounds, they take these random ideas, and manage to stitch it up together in a really creative, fun, and fascinating way. And if I were to follow along on that analogy for this Netflix live action, it's almost like a cover band trying to perform the same jazz song, but they're nowhere near as good of a musician as the original. You might be able to feel the exact same emotions from that same jazz song, but at the end of the day, it ain't the original version of the jazz song. And I think that's the biggest problem that the Netflix Cowboy Bebop had right from the get-go, right from when it was first announced, is that the expectations this thing needed to reach in order to satisfy the majority of the anime fandom and pretty much all of the fans of Cowboy Bebop was excruciatingly high, almost to the point where it was practically impossible. But as I mentioned in a previous video where I thought the outcry of people saying that it was going to be horrible or that it was going to ruin Cowboy Bebop or whatever, and I thought that was a little bit of an over-exaggeration. Link is up in the top corner if you'd like to check that out, by the way. Just looking again at it from the aesthetics, which is all we got in the trailer, it looked pretty alright. But of course, I was staying reserved. I was keeping my judgment because I wasn't sure how these aesthetics would pan out in the context of the story, the pacing, and the writing of the entire series. And now that I know the full context, it's probably a good idea that I stayed skeptic, because the writing was definitely the Achilles heel of this series. Like, I didn't know it was actually possible to create something more cartoony than the cartoon that it was based off. Some of these character interactions between not only Spike, Jet, and Faye, but just especially like the villains and like the mob characters just seems so outlandish to the point where it just becomes ridiculous. At times, it's like I'm watching a sitcom or like a YouTube parody of Cowboy Bebop and not actually these real characters interacting with one another. The amount of unnecessary one-liners in this show just made me want to pull my goddamn eardrums out. Not only were they just not very funny or witty or smart in any way, it didn't really add to the characteristics of the character that said it, nor did it aid in any, I guess, setting up of the current situation or setting up of the story in general. If anything, a lot of these one-liners actually pulled me out from the world that it was trying so hard to desperately cling onto, because it was like half the shit I listened to was like something you'd hear in like a standard Trash Taste episode. I think the intent was to kind of give off again this very playful performance between Spike, Jet, and Faye, and making them become, these buddy guys, just these characters who are down and about, just doing whatever the fuck they want. Hey, whatever happens, bro. I get that, because they did that in the original anime as well, but there's a reason why some things should be kept in anime, because the type of dialogue exchange between two anime characters is very hard to replicate and make sound natural with real actors. Anyone who's ever been to a maid cafe in Japan will know. That shit's cute in anime, but it's cringe as hell when it comes out of the mouth of a real person. And not gonna lie, some of these one-liners, just from how corny and, again, unnecessary they were to the plot or the situation that they were set in, it was just making me scratch my head. Like, it really is this the way that you're gonna try and get us to like these characters? Because if anything, it's kind of doing the opposite. And when I say that, I am definitely not throwing any of that criticism towards the actual actors themselves, because if anything, the actual actors did a pretty fantastic job of playing their individual characters. I especially enjoyed Spike and Jet. I thought the actors that they got were perfect for these characters, and they didn't really like outplay their characters too much. They weren't like too over exaggerated or too overhyped to the point where it just becomes unbelievable and too anime-like. Faye, on the other hand, while I really could not stand her performance for, I'd say, like the first 3 episodes or so, she did start to kind of warm up to me around the second half. She did start to kind of calm down. Either that, or I just got used to it, or I gave up. I don't know which one it was. But by the end of the series, I liked all 3 of the characters. There wasn't really a character that I was like, oh god. Although I think to the average viewer who probably didn't sit through the entirety of Cowboy Bebop and kind of just gave up in maybe the first 1 or 2 episodes, yeah, I don't blame you for not liking Faye's performance, because it really is a little too... I didn't know things could be too tongue-in-cheek until I saw this. The other, like, minor criticism, or I guess minor, like, point that I wanted to, I guess, point out is, whoever the director was for some of these episodes, they really, like, overlove the use of the Dutch tilt. The use of the Dutch tilt traditionally in film has a number of uses. You'll actually see it mostly in a lot of thriller and horror movies to add a suspense or add some kind of atmosphere that, oh, something is wrong with this particular scenario. And in the case with Cowboy Bebop, having it being no horror whatsoever, used it in a suspenseful manner, but, when every third shot is a fucking Dutch tilt, yeah, that suspense starts to run pretty dry. And another minor inconvenience I had, which might explain why a lot of people found the dialogue exchange between a lot of the characters very weird and unnatural, is that I noticed very quickly, especially in the first half of the series, I noticed very quickly that they do very little J and L cuts. This adds this idea of continuity and flow to the conversation, which doesn't seem as jarring because it is kind of melting into the next scene rather than it being a hard cut to the next scene. Like in a normal realistic conversation, whenever someone says something to anyone, there's usually some kind of a pause or, some kind of space between lines. But in a lot of scenes with Spike and Jet earlier on, there is almost no space between dialogue. It's like everything was pre-programmed. You'll see that a lot in anime, where if there's two people talking, there is almost little to no space between dialogue. And that works again because it is a cartoon, right? And obviously you're not going to expect realistic dialogue between two cartoon characters who are obviously not real. It becomes a little different though when you use real actors, like in live action anime. You can't just have it all pre-planned because then it doesn't seem like a natural conversation. It again just seems like a performance. It throws you out of that realistic looking setting by not sounding realistic. Again, those are just very, very minor nitpicks, to be honest, and this is a problem that again is prevalent with a lot of live action anime and is probably the reason why a lot of live action anime just does not sound natural, because again, they're trying to use a flow of conversation that works in an anime, not so much in live action. But one thing I would like to say is the whole Ed situation. In this image right here, you will notice a certain character is missing, and it's almost hilarious how self-aware Netflix was of the non-existence of Ed, because I actually found something really interesting. In episode 5, there is a scene where Jet and his old partner are under this bridge. On the side of the pole, there is what clearly looks like a QR code. Like it's in the actual scene. There's a QR code almost painted on with spray paint. And I thought, that's really weird. So I decided maybe I can scan this with a QR code scanner on my phone, and this is what I found. Okay, episode 5. In the scene right here, there's a QR code that is clearly way too visible. What does it take you to?
Oh!
What is it?
Oh wow, that's fantastic. Where's Ed on Netflix?
Oh wow.
Wow.
I wonder if anyone has found that. They probably have.
1,500 people.
That's not a lot.
The comments.
To be honest.
Lesson. If you see a QR code,
scan it.
Scan it.
So yeah, the QR code ends up taking you to a video that shows off Ed before you actually find out in the very, very end of the last episode. I'm talking literally the last minute and a half of the last episode. Ed just randomly pops up in front of Spike. This is after the entire Vicious versus Spike fight ends. This is after Faye goes back to Earth to look for her home planet. This is after Jet decides to say fuck you to Spike and leave him behind. I mean, for one, I personally did not really give a shit about Ed even in the anime. He was my least favorite character even in the anime. So to be honest, if Ed never showed up in the live action, I wouldn't have thought otherwise. But it just seems like a really obvious last minute scrape in. It was almost like the team behind this live action was aware of the potential backlash they were going to receive if they didn't include Ed whatsoever. So they decided to scramble up some kind of idea to at least throw Ed in as a cameo at the end of the series. And the quality of which Ed comes in that last episode is clearly thrown together. It was clearly a last minute idea. It's so obvious just from watching that last minute and a half that they were never going to put Ed in from the very beginning. It's so obvious they did it at the last minute just because there were so many people for some reason really outraged on Twitter and on the internet as to not seeing Ed. I mean, he's mentioned throughout the series, so they do actually acknowledge his existence very, very subtly, but I don't actually think they had any intentions of putting Ed in from the very beginning, because Ed is a very anime character. It's almost impossible to do a character like that justice with a real actor, and the last minute introduction of Ed in the last episode very clearly shows that. The performance is just like so over exaggerated, and it's not like the actor playing the live action Ed is doing a bad job or anything. In fact, he's probably doing a really fucking good job of being like anime Ed, but the reason why it feels so cringe is because Ed as a character is a bit cringe. I know Ed fans and Cowboy Bebop fans don't want to admit it, but trust me, go back and watch any scene in the anime that has Ed in it. That character is cringe as fuck. Of course, you can throw the argument of, oh, that's the whole reason why people loved him though, because he was cringe. But you have to understand that if you were going to put him in a live action with a real person, and he's already cringe as an anime character, just imagine how cringe he's going to be with a real actor. But then again, people will complain being like, oh, then why did they make Cowboy Bebop a live action in the first place, blah, blah, blah. And if you throw that argument out, then, there's really no winning. I will admit, as much as I didn't think this Cowboy Bebop live action was fucking amazing or anything like that, I still thought it was a valiant effort. And the people who are online right now saying that it's comparable to Death Note live action or fucking even Dragon Ball Evolution live action, I think is overreacting a little too much, because I can tell you firsthand the Death Note Netflix adaptation was a million times worse than this. But yeah, look, as someone who wasn't exactly like a massive fan of Cowboy Bebop, I thought this show was like, okay, it was enjoyable in parts, but it wasn't, again, the most amazing thing ever. It was a valiant effort that had a lot of good intentions behind it, and it just didn't pan out. Bottom line, I would watch this again over the Netflix Death Note live action. Like, that was actually atrocious. At least this one kind of came from a respected place, and with Watanabe Shinichiro foreseeing this entire thing, I think that was a very clear sign that this definitely was made with a lot of love, and it was clearly made by Cowboy Bebop fans. So yeah, those are my 2 cents on the Netflix Cowboy Bebop live action. Let me know what you guys thought about it if you watched it down in the comments below. But if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to smack my face right now and follow your boy. Let's keep making big channel number go bigger. Over here next to my head is a couple more videos you can check out on this channel if you enjoyed, and if you'd like to follow your boy on his social media, then all of that is down in the description box below as always. I'm gonna go rest my eyes now because they hurt like a motherfucker, but I'll see you in the next video. Peace.